the idyllic villages that cling to our coastline. Known for their beauty and serenity.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that sailor.
Now destinations for our leisure. But once they played a vital role in our history.
This is amazing. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm intrigued by our coastal villages because there's always a bigger story behind that idyllic postcard image.
I'm exploring the pretty village of Orford on England's east coast. This remote Suffolk village lies 16 miles away from Ipswich. It's a place rich with myths and legends that still live on today.
Ah, I can see he's all sort of shaggy and hairy here and carrying a club.
And wartime secrets of national importance.
It was put to us very straightforwardly. You must not ever tell anyone about this.
And tales of subterranean skullduggery.
It's allegedly a smuggler's pub.
A smuggler's pub?
Hidden tunnels, hidden cellars.
There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea.
To reach Orford from the North Sea, you have to travel up the estuary of the rivers Orr and Ald.
Looking at the village now, I can see that it's just perched up on a slight rise. A height of a few metres or feet really makes a difference on this flat East Anglian coast.
My skipper for today is Ollie Page.
That's a nice day for a bit of boating, Ollie, isn't it?
Oh, you couldn't want for a much better day than today.
And it seems odd to me that we're sailing on this lovely wide expanse of water here. And yet the sea is just over there, beyond that green bank.
That's right. To get to the same point where we are now, about 100 yards to our right-hand side, we've actually got to travel 5 miles downriver and then travel another 5 miles back up on the coastal side.
But it wasn't always that way, was it?
No, you go back 900 years ago, the entrance to the North Sea was probably just north of Orford.
Right, so this great shingle spit has grown over hundreds of years.
That's correct.
Yeah. Makes it a very distinctive landscape, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it's probably one of the most unique places that I know along the East Coast.
Orford is a small village on the very eastern edge of England. It's an attractive place, ideal for a bit of leisure boating, seafood dining, a lovely day out. But that wasn't always the case. I'm here to find out how this remote part of Suffolk played a key role in defensive and military innovation over more than 800 years, from the 12th century to the 20th century. Taking my first look at the village. This one is the watch house. This was used by the Coast Guards, and it's much modified, but you can see the old brick core there, and a window looking out to sea, looking out to the Ness, because the Coast Guards originally were there to guard the coast against piracy, against smugglers. They weren't there to protect lives at sea. And there's some other buildings here that give a clue to what was going on the quayside. These are old warehouses, very stout red brick buildings, 3 stories high there, 2 stories high there, and there's another one down the street, end on. So I'm getting the sense of quite a busy commercial area here.
There would have been fishing boats landing their catches of herrings and oysters, and other vessels transporting goods ranging from stone to wool and wine.
This street leading down to the quay is lined by these cottages, but this one looks a little bit different. It's set apart from the others. It looks a little taller, a little grander. And, yes, here we go. The old customs house. So this is where the customs officials would have lived, had their offices, overseen all the trade that was happening on the quayside.
The very first records that mention Orford as a settlement were written around 1100, when the village grew near the projecting shingle spit called Orford Ness. The Ness has grown and changed over the centuries, but 900 years ago it created a naturally sheltered harbour. And from then on, Orford flourished as a busy port and fishing village.
Now this is interesting. Anywhere else you might think this is a village green in front of the houses here, but there's quite a height difference between the road and the path and where I am now. And that's because in the medieval period, this was a cut, another quayside coming up from the river. And there were moorings for small boats offloading their cargoes. Well, there's another medieval building that played a key role in the prosperity and growth of Orford. It's just over there.
Towering above the village, keeping watch on all the commercial activity in the port, is Orford Castle. After confiscating the land and settlement from Archbishop Thomas Becket, Henry II built Orford Castle in 1164, and it's dominated this Suffolk landscape ever since. Today, this medieval stronghold is undergoing conservation.
Here's the impressive keep of Orford Castle through the scaffold. But the castle was once much, much larger, and I'm standing on earthworks here that indicate just how impressive this fortress was. Imagine a great stone curtain wall with interval towers on it, a deep ditch, layer upon layer of defence.
King Henry built the castle to quell the trouble he was having with his neighbour, the Earl of Suffolk. Henry wanted to send a clear message that he was in charge.
Just walking up this spectacular spiral staircase, and I noticed above me this vaulting here seems to have impressions of the wooden boards that helped form it in the medieval period, evidence of the medieval construction. This is the upper hall, and in many ways this is the nerve centre of the castle. We're right in the centre of the keep here. This room is almost circular. There are private chambers running off. There's a kitchen over there. And it's a multi-purpose space. This was where justice was dispensed. Administration would have been carried out for the estates around. And then, when the king came, out would come the tapestries, the fine furnishings, there'd be a roaring fire, feasts would be held in here. But in times of war, it became a garrison. A serious fighting force would come in here, and everything would be about defence.
The castle keep was constructed with a distinctive 18-sided polygon shape, and that provided King Henry's soldiers with a 360-degree vista.
Well, I'm glad I made the long climb up the stairs there, because I'm getting more of a sense of the defensive capabilities of this castle. We've got these towers, these turrets right at the top, and they would have been additional fighting platforms, but also observation platforms, because the view up here is amazing. If the troublesome bygods were coming from over there, you'd see them from miles off. As soon as they broke cover, you'd see them and be ready for them. And out here, you get this wonderful panorama of the sea. So any French ships coming, any Flemish ships coming, you'd be forewarned, you'd be arming up and ready. It utterly dominates the landscape and seascape for miles around.
The castle might have successfully defended this corner of Suffolk for centuries, but one foe it hasn't been able to fend off is erosion. English Heritage look after it. Dr Shelley Garland is the property's curator and has been working on the conservation of its stonework.
Shelley, why is this necessary? What's going on?
So we've been looking at the building for a while, and we knew that we would need to carry out a significant amount of work. The stone crumbles, it's in an exposed location, it's like a jumper unravelling.
That's affecting the structural integrity of the castle. I mean, you could get collapse.
Yes, we've got to the point now where we had to act. So to try and sort the problem out, we've had to look at various different stones and different options. And we've come to the decision that we are going to have a mixture of packing in with stone and then rendering over the top, and that will give it a completely secure finish.
Yeah, so you've got some sample panels right here to see how it might appear. There's sort of bits of shell in here, there's bits of stone and gravel.
Yes, well, it's really important that we get the look right to get an idea of the mixes that we're going to use and also the finish. Mortar finish is often brushed, but this is beaten with a brush, which is a really old technique. It's very labour intensive.
Yeah, and of course, that would give it a colour and uniformity. These buildings weren't meant to be camouflaged in the landscape, were they? They were supposed to stand out, be intimidating.
Oh, absolutely. If you're building a castle to intimidate all your neighbours, you want it shining bright and to be seen from many miles away.
Yeah. I think it's just splendid, and even better, we'll know it's going to last for generations to come.
It will.
From the 12th to the 14th century, the castle held prisoners on occasion, and in the late 12th century, it held one notable and strange captive. Ralph of Coggeshall, a medieval chronicler, wrote that fishermen out at sea dragged up a wild man, a merman, in their nets. They didn't know what to make of him. He didn't speak any language that they understood. So they brought him here to the castle and held him in a cell just under the keep. And when they couldn't get him to speak, they tortured him, hung him up by his feet. They took him off to church to see if he would show any signs of reverence, any signs of belief. Eventually, they let him go swimming about in the sea again, but guarded him with nets. Then he escaped, never to be seen again.
The legend goes that the merman or wild man of Orford was brought here to the Church of St Bartholomew. Much of the church has since been rebuilt, but remains of the old Norman building can still be seen.
This is Norman architecture. You see the little zigzag designs there on those Romanesque arches, those heavy columns coming down. This would have been built in the late 12th century. And we know from the merman was brought to the church here. He may have even set foot in this area here. They were trying to see if he responded to any kind of religion or belief system. he didn't. But the rumour is he's still in the church here somewhere, in a funny kind of way.
The Reverend Giles can show me where, as the merman myth has literally been set in stone for all to see.
You've got a splendid church here, and this is a really wonderful font as well.
It is, and this is the thing that fascinates children in particular, that at the bottom we have all these mythical beasts, including this particular character here, who legend says is based on the merman of Orford.
Ah, I can see he's all sort of shaggy and hairy here and carrying a club. But this is just very, very interesting because you've got obviously Christianity being depicted, but then something darker, wilder, something scarier happening.
That's right. And for me, it's all about how the early church made that link between some of the pagan beliefs of the people with the relatively new Christian beliefs, so people can see how our religion has evolved.
Yeah. There's a story, isn't there, in everything. Everything's trying to convey some form of message, some form of teaching.
It is, and it's one of those stories that catches the imaginations of people. They can relate to it and to what happens in our own times, how we treat people who might look or speak differently to us. So I always use that as an example where someone who was different wasn't welcomed and loved.
Yeah. Well, he's clearly loved by the village and he's got a prime spot here, so it's been a pleasure to see him.
Thank you.
Henry's influence, his castle, brought increasing prosperity to Orford throughout the medieval period. And I'm standing in the commercial heart of the village, this market area, wide, fringed by buildings all the way round. It's a classic medieval market space. Imagine the hubbub and excitement of market and fair days here. But by 1500, the port at Orford was beginning to decline. There were overseas wars, piracy, and worse still, the shingle spit was growing, extending across the mouth of the estuary, across the river, cutting off Orford from the sea.
This was a disaster for a village that had relied on direct access to the sea for trade and its fishing fleet. The very feature that had once made Orford a haven for shipping was responsible for its demise as a prosperous port.
In 1722, the author and chronicler Daniel Defoe wrote that Orford was once a good town but had now decayed. However, there was one trade that was still thriving: smuggling. In fact, it was so widespread that the great statesman Robert Walpole, first Earl of Orford, reported that the only person who wasn't involved in smuggling was the parson. Perhaps he was just the smartest.
It's believed that for hundreds of years, smugglers shared out their ill-gotten gains in the King's Head pub. Landlord Ian Ballantine has been doing research into the murky goings-on.
Oh, good, thank you very much.
That's a wonderful old pub you've got here. It's full of character, isn't it?
Yes, it dates back to the 13th century, allegedly.
13th century medieval stuff, yeah. What's the evidence for this being a smuggler's pub as opposed to an ordinary pub?
And we know it's a smuggler's pub because there's a smuggler's window upstairs. So it was like a warning signal. If the customs excise man was in, the light was on, and they didn't bring their goods in. There's also allegedly a tunnel.
A tunnel?
Yeah. Where it goes to, whether it's actually there, is nobody's knowledge. It's just good local gossip.
I hear a lot of stories about tunnels connecting castles and churches and manor houses. Just occasionally there's something that explains that legend. So I'm really intrigued. If you reckon you've got something there?
I'd like to think so.
Shall we go down and have a look?
Let's do it.
Down in the cellar, surveyor Matthew Bunting is looking for the evidence.
How are you getting on, Matthew?
Yeah, not too bad.
And what have you got?
So this is a handheld GPR system. So we're just carrying out GPR scans to actually look inside the wall and see if there is anything in there.
Ground penetrating radar, or GPR, emits high-frequency radio waves into the ground, or in this case, the wall. It's a bit like an X-ray, as its radio waves will be able to show us any signs of buried objects, voids, even tunnels.
So we can actually see here, then, the thickness of the wall is around about 15 centimetres thick.
Brick thick.
Yeah. And then apart from that, there is nothing at the moment. But
That's disappointing, isn't it?
It won't stop the locals pretending there's one there.
Yeah, but of course, it doesn't mean to say that there aren't other things sort of shooting off in other directions.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
There are still investigations to be carried out, and who knows, there may be a tunnel yet to be discovered. The natural cover of the shingle spit made Orford perfect for smugglers. And its location led it to play a major role in the nation's security in the 20th century.
The remoteness of Orford always made it a great place to land illicit goods, and especially the Ness, detached from the village, surrounded by water, close to the sea. All sorts of things could go on over there, away from prying eyes. And it was exactly those qualities that led the government to take a look at that place and think, we could make use of it.
A year after the outbreak of the First World War, the War Department set up a top-secret weapons and ammunition testing site on the Ness. Their covert military operations spanned almost 7 decades, but it didn't stop some of the locals keeping a watchful eye on what they were up to. Built on a high point in the village is the aptly named High House.
And it is high, it's on a rise, and it looks 18th century. The house has obviously been modified, there's an extra wing on it, and these big bay windows have been put in. And it does have fantastic views out towards the sea, out towards Orford Ness.
It was once the home of Michael Flint's family. He was aged 9 at the outbreak of World War II.
Hello there, Michael.
Hello.
This is a very grand house, isn't it?
My grandfather was the doctor here.
I mean, this house faces right out onto the Ness there. Yeah. And you as a child here, you had a front row seat of what was going on this secret island just offshore.
Exactly right, yes, and it was wonderful. So we used to go right up into the roof, go right up the top and look from there. And I think we could see things over there we probably weren't even supposed to see.
You weren't afraid of getting arrested for spying or anything like that?
Exactly. Yeah, well, it was meant to be totally secret.
But nevertheless, you saw some curious and extraordinary things here.
Oh, yes. About 1941 or 42, a Dornier came along. It was a German aeroplane. Dropped 6 or 7 bombs. And it was never reported.
You witnessed a German aircraft bombing the Ness.
Yeah. It was put to us very straightforwardly. You must not ever tell anyone about this. Yeah.
But I bet there were local rumours and speculation, especially amongst the children, about what was going on out there. Were you ever tempted to sneak out there and just take a closer look at what was happening?
Absolutely not. Everything about it was terrifying. You were very cautious about going down
So
there.
it was definitely out of bounds to the kids in the village. Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Top secret work on weapons research and military innovations on the Ness resulted in all kinds of new technology being tried out.
Morning.
I'm going to try and find out more about some of these secret activities. The Ministry of Defence sold the site to the National Trust almost 30 years ago, leaving behind an assortment of abandoned structures that give us some clues about what they were up to.
I've been fascinated by this place for years, and now I'm getting the chance to explore up close. And it is extraordinary. I'm seeing these bunker-like buildings here, and they're very, very strange. They're obviously designed to minimise impact from explosions. Just everywhere you look, there's an enigmatic structure.
Glenn Pearce is a ranger for the National Trust.
So remote, isn't it? Just incredible to think of those early experiments taking place here. I'd read that they're actually looking for a death ray where you could shoot down aeroplanes with beams of radiation.
Yeah, radar was a byproduct of that research. Robert Watson-Watts and his team here were brought here to work out that. They very quickly realised that the power required to that would be multiple times of anything they could produce. But what they found is, in researching that they could get reflections off a plane, radar-borne. So, yeah, lots of work here started in one area, but actually developed into something else.
Just imagine all that innovation taking place on this spot, on this lonely stretch of coastline.
Exactly, and I think the location makes it even more pressurised. We're standing here now overlooking the North Sea. You know, just over there, First World War and Second World War, that's where the war was. I think this coastline has always been the forefront of invasions in British history. It's going right back to Viking times. This is the coast that has been invaded first in the UK. So anyone here is acutely aware that the work you're doing here is defence of the realm stuff.
From King Henry's majestic castle right up to the extraordinary military innovations taking place over there on the Ness in the 20th century, Orford has been at the forefront of the nation's defences. And who would have thought that of this hidden away, charming Suffolk village? But it only goes to show, sometimes the smallest places can hold the greatest secrets.